He was mocked, ridiculed, and doubted. But finally, after 3 long years, Quentin Johnston is proving that he belongs in the NFL after an electric start to the 2025 NFL season. What's up, everyone? I'm Sam Peña, a bold fan in the bird for Chargers Digest, where we talk about all things Lightning. Today we're talking about Quentin Johnston and what a turnaround it's been for him. After what was a pretty dismal first 2 seasons in the league, Quentin Johnston is finally living up to the potential that we always believed he might have and what the Chargers thought he had when they drafted him in the first round 3 years ago. Now he's got a pretty easy matchup in week 4 against the New York Giants. The only question being, can the Chargers keep Justin Herbert upright? But today I want to talk about how Quentin Johnston fits in this Chargers offense, the areas in which he improved after his struggles in the first 2 years, and where I think he can still improve his game. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. 3 years ago, when the Chargers drafted Quentin Johnston in the first round, they took him ahead of 2 other receivers who were also considered first-round picks. That would be Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers. Addison went on to have a pretty solid start to his career against the Vikings, and Zay Flowers has been a staple of the Ravens offense for the past couple of years. Both of those players had better starts to their careers than QJ did, and because of that, there were a lot of question marks and criticism the Chargers got for making that pick. And to be honest, I wouldn't sit here and say that the Chargers made the best first-round pick they had even now. I still think Johnston has quite a bit of ways to go when it comes to developing as a player, but I think he's put himself on even footing now with those 2 other players. The first couple of years, he really struggled with drops. We, of course, all know the moment against Green Bay when Herbert dropped the ball in perfectly over the top in the bucket for Johnston, and then he dropped it. That ended what could have been a game-winning drive for the Bolts. Then, of course, we know last year, his game against the Baltimore Ravens, where he had multiple drops, including a critical one on 3rd down that kept the Ravens ahead in the game and would have allowed the Chargers to come back into the game, but unfortunately, the Ravens put the game away in the very next drive. And of course, the Houston Texans playoff game that just happened last year, where unfortunately he didn't have a single catch, and even though he was targeted multiple times, he couldn't seem to reel in any of the passes thrown his way. Johnston has had some early struggles, and a big part of it has been his route running, which has been very rudimentary to say the least. He also is someone who has struggled with drops, as I just mentioned. I think that's a part of his game that's never going to be at an elite level, but I don't think you need to be a receiver with elite hands to still be a legitimate threat in the NFL. You look at great receivers like Terrell Owens, he also was infamous for having drop issues as well. But he continued to be one of the better receivers in the league. I don't think Johnston is as talented as T.O. was, but I do think when you look at just his size, speed, weight, he's someone who measures up pretty well with some of the best receivers in the NFL. I mean, the guy is 6'3", and he's 215 pounds, and with the weight he's probably put on since he was drafted, he probably plays at around 220. So Johnston is someone who is a legit athlete on the field. And I think that's something that Harbaugh saw when he kept him on the roster, even though some people were calling for him to be cut, which is that he can still make big plays. Harbaugh knows this firsthand because Johnston was the one who kind of put the death nail in Harbaugh's championship bid 2 years ago when QJ was in his last year. It was the second round of the college football playoffs, and QJ went off against Harbaugh's Wolverines and even took a small pass underneath for 80 yards and a touchdown. So Harbaugh knew the type of athlete that Johnston was, and the Chargers knew the type of athlete he was as well. But they had to continue to develop those other parts of his skill set, which is where I give some great respect for Sanjay Law. I think that's the biggest change when you look at Quentin Johnston from year 2 to year 3 is his confidence that's been instilled in him by Sanjay Law. All of a sudden, Quentin Johnston is going up for some of these passes as if they are his to begin with. So let's talk about the main areas he's improved. First of all, as a route runner, we've seen him add a lot more nuance to his routes that he didn't always have. When you actually look at the data when it comes to wide receiver win rate in the NFL, he's currently 14th in the league out of all qualifying receivers. That's massive. That's a massive jump for a player who struggled in that metric last season. Then you look at his separation and his win rate route against man coverage. He's ahead of some of the top receivers in the league, and he's number 1 when it comes to separation situation created. Now, coming up this week against the Giants, this is going to be a pretty good matchup for him when it comes to being able to feast on this relatively weak Giants secondary. Right now, the Giants give up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers, and currently they are giving up an average of 8 targets, 79 yards, and a touchdown per each receiver. Johnston is someone who should be looking to feast on that with that 14% wide receiver win rate when it comes to his routes. I think Johnston is going to have a big game this week. And that leads to my second point when it comes to his improvement, which is his ability to make the contested catch. I don't think he's ever going to be elite at this, but he is someone who is showing that he can do that now. We saw it last week against the Denver Broncos when he was matched up one-on-one against Pat Surtain. Herbert had to bail out of the pocket to his right. He looked downfield. He threw the ball up to QJ. It was actually a pretty bad throw by Herbert, but QJ was able to make a pretty impressive catch, spinning backwards to be able to reach up with both hands and snag it. Similarly, against the Raiders, you also saw that improvement as well when it came to catching passes over the shoulder. Against the Raiders, he had that huge 60-yard touchdown from Herbert, which pretty much put the Chargers ahead for good in that game. And a large part of that is what he and Law say they've been working on for the past couple of years, which is his ability to track the football over his shoulder. The Athletic's Daniel Popper reported that QJ was working after practice on just consistently taking those passes over his shoulder, tracking them, catching them, tossing it back, going another 10 yards, and repeating the same motion. That's something that's very difficult for any wide receiver to be able to do, and Johnston realized this was a weak point in his skill set and has since put in the time and the effort to make this a strength. Now, will that continue for the rest of the season? We'll see. But as of right now, Johnston is on a monster pace to finish with 79 receptions and over 1,300 yards receiving. That's a step up from last year where he was over 800 yards receiving and had a solid 9 touchdowns. And then the year before that where he consistently struggled as a rookie. So Johnston is going to improve his numbers, it looks like, this season, barring injury. But more importantly, it's exciting to see that he's fixing the little problems that he had in his route running and with his hands that were consistently making him a liability on the field. Finally, I want to talk about where he fits in this Chargers offense the rest of the year. I think the Chargers, interestingly, now have kind of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to receiving weapons. Keenan Allen has been a massive boost for this Chargers offense since he returned. He has a touchdown in each of his 3 first games. Keenan is someone who is fantastic at targeting that intermediate to short area of the field, and Herbert's been looking his way early and often on those third downs. McConkey, I know his numbers haven't quite been at where they were at last year, but let's not get it twisted here. Ladd is still the number 1 on this team. He's someone who has legit 4.3 speed, and his threatening defense is deep. Quentin, I think, therefore, kind of has an easy way to improve here with the Chargers in that he's probably never going to see any sort of double coverage. Most teams are going to be focusing their efforts on Ladd McConkey like they have done the first few weeks here. And now, because of Keenan Allen being such a threat, they're probably going to try to make sure they use a linebacker underneath to be able to keep Keenan from beating them there, which means Johnston is going to have opportunities to make plays downfield, which he has been doing so far. Quentin Johnston is someone I was not very high on coming out of the draft, and of course I think he was rightly criticized for all of his struggles in his first 2 years, but I'm excited to see him continue to develop and improve and become a legitimate threat for the Bolts now. I think something that we have to remember when it comes to all NFL players is that everyone can improve. You should never give up on someone just because they've had early struggles. The Chargers didn't, and now they're reaping the benefits. Thank you all so much again for watching. I'm Sam Peña, a Bolt fan here in the Berg here for Chargers Digest. I would really appreciate it if you guys could like and subscribe. We're trying to build the channel here from the ground up. Would appreciate any support you can show to us. And until next time, Bolt Nation, remember, Bolt up.